The fragrance of expensive sandalwood couldn't mask the chill in the study. My elder sister, Shen Zulin, stood like a willow in the wind, her fingers trembling as she pulled a jade hairpin from her hair. It was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, the 9th marriage proposal gift from General Wei Ju of the northern frontier. Father, Zulin's voice was like a tinkling bell, filled with a tragic sort of grace. I am a woman of poetry and ink. How can you ask me to marry a man who smells of blood and iron? To marry a warrior who hasn't read a single line of the classics is to bury my soul in the desert sand. Our father, the Minister of Rights, looked like he was about to have a stroke. Zulin, this is his 9th proposal. Each time he asks, my rank in the court rises. If we reject him again, he won't bring more gifts, he'll bring his army. I stood in the corner, quietly calculating the market value of the jade hairpin she had just tossed onto the table. Fine Hessian jade. At least 500 taels of silver at the West Market pawnshop, I thought. I would rather die, Zulin declared, looking toward me with a sudden, sharp glint in her eyes. Why not send Kingren? She has always been fond of mundane things. She has no appreciation for the arts, anyway. All eyes turned to me. I was the daughter of the second wife, the daughter of a lowly merchant woman. In this house I was the shadow, the copycat, the one who wore Zulin's hand-me-down silks. I stepped forward, my gaze fixed not on my father's face, but on the chest of gold-leafed ornaments sitting by the door. If elder sister finds the general's affection so burdensome, I said, my voice calm and steady, I will take it. I will marry General Wei. Zulin let out a breath of relief, a smug, pitying smile curling her lips. Truly, little sister, you are a scavenger. You'll take even the scraps I discard. I bowed low to hide the sparkle in my eyes. Scraps. General Wei Ju owned half the iron mines in the north and had a direct line to the western silk trade. To Zulin, he was a brute. To me, he was a walking treasury. The wedding was the talk of the capital. My dowry was doubled by a father who was desperate to appease the general, and the streets were lined with red lanterns. But as I sat on the edge of the dragon and phoenix bed, the heavy red veil obscuring my vision, the door didn't creak open for a groom. Instead, a panicked adjutant shouted from outside the courtyard, "Madam, emergency at the border. The general has been summoned by imperial decree. He left. He left for the frontier 10 minutes ago." The maids gasped, whispering about my bitter fate, married and abandoned before the candles were even blown out. I reached up and yanked the heavy gold phoenix crown off my head. It weighed at least 5 pounds. I weighed it in my hand, a grin spreading across my face. "Madam," my maid, Ali, stammered. "Are you crying?" Crying, I laughed, tossing the crown onto the silk duvet. "Ali, bring me the keys to the general's treasury. If the husband isn't here, I don't have to serve Tito-in-laws or endure his warrior's temper. I have a mansion, a title, and the keys to the vault of the wealthiest man in the north." I sat down at the vanity, not reaching for a poem book, but for my jade-beaded abacus. "Let the elder sister keep her soulful scholar," I whispered, the beads clicking rhythmically in the quiet room. "I'll take the gold." The rumor mill in the capital was a hungry beast, and it feasted on me for 3 years. Poor Shen Kingren, they whispered at the tea-houses, married to a ghost. Her husband would rather face barbarian arrows than look at her face. My elder sister, Zulin, was the loudest of the mourners. She had married her jade scholar, a man named Suheng who spent his days writing odes to the moon and his nights spending Zulin's dowry at the gambling dens. Whenever we met, she would stroke her faded sleeves and look at me with performative pity. Little sister, money cannot buy back a wasted youth, she sighed during the Mid-Autumn Festival, eyeing my robe of iridescent cloud silk. Do you not feel the loneliness of an empty bed? I popped a grape into my mouth, my eyes fixed on the ledger hidden beneath my fan. The bed is quite large, sister. It's excellent for spreading out my account books. One cannot sleep on a bed of poems, after all. But the piece of my gilded cage was about to shatter. I was in the middle of the general's private study, a place I had turned into my unofficial headquarters. I was sprawled on the floor, robes untidy, hair loose surrounded by stacks of silver ingots. I was sorting into investment and savings piles. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors were kicked open. A blast of cold, mountain air rushed in, extinguishing half the candles. A shadow loomed in the doorway, tall, broad, and smelling of ozone and horsehide. The man was a tower of black iron and stained leather. His eyes, a piercing, amber gold, swept over the room before landing on me. I froze, clutching a 5-tail silver bar to my chest like a shield. Who are you? He growled. His voice was a low vibration that seemed to rattle the very coins on the floor. I am the mistress of this house, I stammered, scrambling to my feet, while trying to kick a pile of gold leaves under the desk. Who are you to break in like a bandit? The corner of his mouth quirked up not a smile, but a predator's bared tooth. He unbuckled his blood-crusted sword and tossed it onto the mahogany table I had polished just that morning. I am the bandit who pays for those silk robes, he said, stepping into the light. I am Wei Ju, and I believe you are the scavenger who took my sister-in-law's place. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't the sweat-reeking brute Zulin had described. He was honed like a blade, dangerous, and devastatingly handsome in a way that made the air in the room feel too thin. General, I said, regaining my poise and smoothing my skirts. You're late. 3 years late. I assumed you'd forgotten the way home. Hard to forget a home that sends me monthly reports on the General's chilled drink shop and the Northern Garrison Theater, he said, walking toward me. He didn't stop until he was inches away. He was so tall I had to crane my neck back. You've been busy, Shen Kingren. You've doubled my treasury while I was busy bleeding for the Emperor. I stiffened. I merely ensured the assets didn't stagnate. As your wife, it was my duty to manage the household. Is that so? He reached out, his callous thumb brushing a stray smudge of ink on my cheek. The contact felt like fire. Then tell me, wife, did you marry me for the duty, or the gold? I looked him straight in those amber eyes, my merchant's blood rising to the challenge. I married you for the gold, General, but I stayed for the autonomy. Wei Ju threw back his head and laughed, a rich, booming sound that filled the silent mansion. Honest, I like that. He suddenly leaned down, his breath warm against my ear. But you should know, Kingren. In the North, we don't let our investments sit idle. Since I've paid so much for this marriage, I think it's time I started collecting the interest. Before I could retort, he scooped me up. One arm was like a band of steel around my waist. General, unhand me. It is broad daylight. The sun is setting, he countered, carrying me toward the bedchamber. And according to the ledger you wrote, I owe you 3 years of marital presence. I'm a man who always pays his debts. The sun had barely begun to crest over the courtyard walls when the sound of a carriage rattled the front gates. I woke with a start, my face flushing as I remembered the interest the General had collected. Beside me, the bed was empty, but the pillow still held the scent of sandalwood and cold steel. A heavy, dark green cloak had been draped carefully over my shoulders. And on the knitstand sat a bowl of warm ginger soup, and a new velvet box. Inside the box was a pair of teardrop emeralds the size of pigeon eggs. "Madam, madam," Ali burst in, her face a mask of panic. "The eldest young lady is here. She says she's come to save you. She brought a physician and two clerks from the ministry." I groaned, rubbing my temples. Zulan never missed an opportunity for a performance. By the time I descended the stairs, Zulan was already center stage in the main hall. She was dressed in a pale, poverty-chic lilac robe, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "My poor sister," she wailed to the group of noblewomen she had brought along for an audience. "I heard the general returned in a rage last night. With his violent temper, who knows what state she is in. I couldn't sleep or wink knowing she was trapped with that beast. If he has laid a hand on a daughter of the Shen family, there will be an inquiry," the ministry clerk added, puffing out his chest. I stepped into the light, leaning casually against a pillar. I made sure to let the emeralds at my ears catch the morning sun. "Sister," I said, my voice dripping with forced sweetness. "You're up early. Is the Jade Scholar's house so cold that you had to come here for warmth?" Zulan froze. She scanned me from head to toe, looking for bruises. Instead, she saw the glowing complexion of a woman who had slept very well and the shimmer of silk that cost more than her husband's annual stipend. "Kingrin, you're alive," Zulan stammered, her eyes narrowing at the emeralds. "Those jewels. Are they glass? Surely the general wouldn't give away such treasures to a wife he actually likes." A deep voice boomed from the doorway. Wei Ju entered, still dressed in his black inner robes. His hair damp. He looked like a mountain lion in a silk shop. He didn't even glance at the ministry officials. His eyes went straight to me. He walked over his large hand, coming to rest, possessively, on the small of my back. "Sister-in-law," Wei Ju said, his voice cold enough to frost the tea sets. "I heard you were worried about my temper. It's true, I'm a man of little patience. For example, I have very little patience for people who enter my home to insult my wife." Zulan turned pale. "General, I only meant. Kingrin is young. She doesn't understand the ways of. She understands how to manage a province's worth of gold while you were busy pawning your dowry to pay for your husband's inkstones," Wei Ju interrupted. He turned to his adjutant, Leon, who was standing by the door. "Leon, what is the protocol for intruders?" "A sound thrashing, General," Leon said, grinning. "Let's be civil," I intervened, patting Wei Ju's arm. The noblewomen in the crowd gasped. No one dared touch the Wolf of the North so casually. Sister is just worried. After all, her own husband hasn't bought her a new hairpin in 2 years. She probably forgot what real gems look like. Later that afternoon, while Wei Ju was at the palace, I went to his study to find a seal for a new merchant contract. While rummaging through a bottom drawer, my hand hit a false floor. I pulled it up, expecting more silver. Instead, I found a bundle of old, yellowed papers. My breath caught. They weren't military maps. They were sketches crude, childhood drawings of birds, markets, and abacuses, my drawings. The ones I used to hide in the garden bushes when I was 10 years old because Zulan said they were base and unrefined. There was also a small, dried apricot flower pressed, between the pages the same flower I had been wearing the day he first came to propose to the Shen family. "You weren't supposed to find those yet." I turned. Wei Ju was leaning against the doorframe, his expression uncharacteristically soft. He pulled me into his arms, his chin resting on my head. "The gold was just to get your attention. Kingren. I knew was the only language you'd listen to. I looked up at him, a mischievous smile playing on my lips. Well, General, your investment is finally starting to pay off. The honeymoon period was short-lived. In the capital, wealth is like a beacon. It attracts both the desperate and the powerful. And there was no one more powerful or moribroke than the emperor. A week after the general's return, an imperial eunuch arrived at our gates, clutching a scroll of bright yellow silk. The decree was simple. The southern floods had depleted the national treasury. And the emperor, in his infinite wisdom, had heard that the general's wife was a genius of finance. He requested a voluntary contribution of 500,000 taels of silver to stabilize the realm. 500,000 taels. That wasn't a contribution. It was a robbery. Wei Ju's hand tightened on the hilt of his sword as he read the decree. The emperor wants to skin the tiger to feed the sheep. He growled, I'll go to the palace. I'll remind him whose blood secured the northern borders. No, I said, placing my hand over his. I was looking at the ledger, my mind spinning like the beads of my abacus. If you refuse, it's treason. If you give it, we're beggars. We don't fight this with steel, husband. We fight this with math. 3 days later, I hosted a charity banquet for the noblewomen of the capital, including the Grand Empress Dowager. I invited Zulan, too. I knew she couldn't resist a chance to see me under pressure. Zulan arrived looking smugger than ever. She had heard rumors of the emperor's demand. Oh, Kingren, she cooed, sipping tea that cost more than her house. It must be so stressful to have so much gold, only for the Son of Heaven to take it all away. Perhaps it's a blessing that Su Heng and I live so simply. We have nothing for the emperor to covet. I didn't answer. Instead, I stood up and addressed the room. Ladies, as you know, our emperor requires 500,000 taels for the flood victims. As the wife of the Northern General, I have already pledged the amount. The room went silent. Zulan's jaw dropped. Wei Ju, standing in the shadows, looked at me with wide eyes. However, I continued, I have not given the silver in coins. I have given it in national infrastructure bonds. Bonds? The Empress Dowager asked, tilting her head. Precisely. I have turned the debt into an investment. The 500,000 taels will fund the construction of a new canal. Every merchant who uses that canal will pay a toll. 40% of that toll goes to the emperor, and 60% goes to the investors, which, as of this morning, includes all of you. I pulled out a stack of beautifully engraved papers. If you buy a bond today, you aren't giving money away. You are owning a piece of the empire's future. In 5 years, your silver will double. Within are the noblewomen who usually spent their manrouge and silk were clawing at each other to hand over their jewelry and cash to buy my bonds. I didn't have to spend a single copper of my own money. I had used the emperor's greed to create a monopoly, and I had made the most powerful women in the city my business partners. Zulan sat in the corner, clutching her empty purse. Realizing that, while she was playing at being a pure scholar, I had just bought the loyalty of the entire imperial court. That night, Wei Ju found me in the study, exhausted but triumphant. You turned a royal robbery into a national bank, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. He walked over and lifted me onto the writing desk, his eyes dark with a mix of pride and hunger. My wife is more dangerous than 1,000 barbarians. I told you, I whispered, wrapping my arms around his neck. Silver is more reliable than. Don't say it, he interrupted, his lips inches from mine. Say it's more reliable than other men, but not me. Just then, Leon burst in, looking breathless. "General, Madam." "It's the scholar, Su Heng. He was caught at the Red Lotus Theater. He tried to pay for a singing girl with a forged bond, one of the ones Madam issued today. The guards have him, and the elder sister is outside the gates, screaming for mercy." I looked at the gold-leafed abacus on my desk. I could save him with a word. Or I could let the law I just created crush the man who had looked down on my mother and me for 20 years. I looked at Wei Ju. He looked back, his expression saying, "The choice is yours, my queen." I straightened my robes. "Bring my sister in," I said coldly. It's time she learned the actual price of a refined soul. The gates of the general's residence creaked open, but there was no red carpet this time. Zulin stumbled into the hall, her hair disheveled and her face streaked with tears. Behind her, 2 guards held Su Heng by his collar. The jade scholar looked like a wilted weed, his expensive robes torn and his face pale with terror. "Kingren, you have to stop them." Zulin threw herself at my feet, clutching the hem of my skirt. "They're saying he committed forgery. They're talking about Exilor the executioner's block. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them the bond was a gift from you." I looked down at her, my expression as unyielding as the silver bars in my vault. "A gift?" I asked softly. "Sister, you told the entire capital that my money was filthy and stench-ridden. Why would your refined husband want a piece of my filth so badly that he would risk his life to forge it? I was desperate." Su Heng blurted out, trembling. The debt collectors were at the door. Zulin had nothing left to pawn, and I heard everyone was getting rich off these bonds of yours. I only meant to borrow a little. To borrow from the Emperor's canal project is to steal from the crown. Wei Ju's voice rang out, cold and sharp. He stepped out from the shadows, his hand resting on the hilt of his dark steel sword. "As a general, I have executed men for stealing a single loaf of bread from the supply lines. What makes a failed scholar worth more than a soldier?" "Please," Zulin wailed, looking at Wei Ju. "General, you proposed to me 10 times. You must have some affection left. For the sake of those 10 proposals, save my husband." A heavy silence filled the hall. I felt a slight tightening in my chest, but then I felt Wei Ju's hand settle firmly on my shoulder. "You are mistaken, Madam Su," Wei Ju said, his voice echoing. "I never proposed to you. I proposed to the daughter of the Shen family, who had the wit to count the stars, while others were merely sighing at them." Zulin's face went bone white. The last shred of her pride, the idea that she was the desired one, shattered right there on the marble floor. I stepped forward, pulling my skirt from Zulin's grasp. "I won't tell the guards it was a gift," I said. "But I won't let him be executed either. That would bring shame to my father's name, and I still have business to conduct in this city." Zulin looked up, a spark of hope in her eyes. "You'll pay his debt." "No," I smiled. "I've bought his debt. I've paid the collectors and the theater. Su Heng is no longer a prisoner of the state. He is a contract laborer for my new shipping fleet in the north. He will spend the next 10 years recording cargo on the frozen docks. Since he loves ink and paper to log crates of Krij. 10 years, Su Heng gasped. In the north, I'll freeze." "Then you'd better work hard to buy a fur coat," I retorted. "And as for you, sister, since you find wealth so vulgar, you can live in the ancestral cottage in the countryside. It's very refined. No gold, no silk, just you and your poems." You're a demon," Zulin whispered, her voice trembling. "No," I replied, turning back toward the study. "I'm a merchant, and I always settle my accounts." "Ana or la terdimpt," The scum had been shipped off to start their new, humble lives. Wei Ju pulled me into his arms, his chin resting on my shoulder, as we looked out over the moonlit gardens. "You were merciful," he murmured. "I was practical," I corrected him, leaning back into his warmth. "A dead scholar earns no interest. A working scholar pays back the principal." He chuckled, a deep, resonant sound that made my heart flutter. "And what about us, madam? Is our account settled?" I turned in his arms, tracing the scars on his chest through his silk robe. "Not quite. I believe there's still a matter of that 70% share of your future war spoils we discussed." Wei Ju laughed, scooping me up and carrying me toward the bedchamber. "You truly are a heartless money grubber. Fine, you can have the 70%. But I get 100% of the wife." I pressed my face into his neck, the scent of sandalwood and home surrounding me. Deal. Outside, the wind rustled through the apricot trees, but inside, the abacus was finally silent. The moon was bright, the treasury was full, and for the first time in my life, I didn't need to count my silver to feel secure.